Welcome back to My Happiness Defined, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're turning back a few chapters to talk about my first marriage, the life I thought I was going to live, and what happened when the story I had written in my mind had to be rewritten. All right, so there was a time when I thought my life was completely figured out. I thought I'd be married to my first husband forever, and I pictured us raising three children together in a small town. I thought I'd spend my life as a country girl with my country husband, being carefree and building the kind of home I'd always imagined. That was my plan, but the problem was life wasn't following that plan. Looking back, I can see that there were warning signs from the very beginning, okay? But when you're young, hopeful, and building a future with someone, it's amazing what you're willing to make excuses for or to explain. I kept believing that the relationship would eventually become what I had imagined it to be. But the truth is, it was far from picture perfect. Looking back now, I can see that there were red flags from the very beginning. I just didn't recognize them. I was young and I was in love, and I believed that because he chose me, I was his first priority. Unfortunately, the first layer to our story was infidelity. It wasn't something that just suddenly appeared years into our marriage or relationship. It was part of our relationship from the very beginning, okay? At the time, I convinced myself that if he wanted to be with me, then that must mean that I was the one he truly loved. We lived together, we had a child together, you understand. But I didn't yet understand that someone can choose to be with you while still failing to choose you completely. And that took me years to understand. What made it even more confusing was that whenever I questioned things, somehow the conversation would turn back on me. And there were tears and there was guilt and there was promises and there was moments in there that made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. And then there were moments that reminded me that I wasn't. I spent a lot of time trying to make sense of things that just did not make sense. I didn't know yet at the time that love could be healthy without being confusing. And I didn't realize that trust shouldn't have to be earned over and over again. And I didn't understand that emotional manipulation can make you question your own reality. I did know, though, that everything seemed to revolve around his needs, his feelings, and his perspective. And over time, I found myself making myself smaller just to keep the peace. I was constantly questioning myself and feeling like I could never quite get it right. I remember being told by him that no one would ever love me the way that he did. And when you hear something like that enough, you just begin to believe it. And I convinced myself that maybe this was as good as it was ever going to get. Maybe I couldn't do better. And maybe no one else would want me. But looking back now, I realize that those words just kept me emotionally attached to a relationship that was not healthy. And that made me question whether leaving meant I was giving up on my only chance at love. I also realized I wasn't just overlooking red flags. I learned that emotional abuse existed. It would honestly take years before I had the language for what I experienced. But once I did, so much of my story finally made sense. Long before I ever became a wife, I was learning what love looked like. But the truth is, I didn't have many examples of a healthy love growing up. The relationships that I witnessed often involved hurt, conflict, dysfunction. So I just assumed that that was just part of loving somebody. I thought that love meant enduring and meant sacrificing yourself. And I thought love meant staying no matter how unhappy or unseen you felt. But that's what I believe love looked like based on what I had been seeing. It wasn't until much later that I realized love should never require you to lose yourself. It shouldn't make you question your worth and it shouldn't leave you feeling small or afraid. And I didn't recognize it then, but I was surviving instead of living. The hardest part is when dysfunction is all you've ever known, it can feel normal. You don't realize how unhealthy something is because you have nothing healthier to compare it to. Sometimes people assume unhealthy relationships are unhealthy all the time, but I'm going to tell you that wasn't my experience. Okay. There were good moments. We had dreams and we laughed together and we spent quality time and made sure I was taken care of. And that's part of what made leaving so complicated. Two things can be true at the same time because someone can provide for you and still treat you in ways that aren't healthy. But This type of marriage was toxic. Coming to that realization, it wasn't easy because it meant admitting that the life I had planned wasn't the life I was meant to stay in. People often say, just leave, as if it's really that simple, as if walking away is just one decision. It isn't. When I chose to leave, I wasn't only thinking about myself, I was thinking about my son. Would he be okay? Could I provide for us? Would I be able to do this on my own? What would people think? Was I making the right decision? Would I ever find love again? And those questions don't disappear just because you know something isn't healthy. They get louder. Choosing to leave wasn't easy because it affected every part of my life and the life of my son. And it meant starting over. It meant uncertainty and it meant facing fears I had never imagined. But I also knew something else. If I stayed, I was teaching my son that this is what love looked like. And I couldn't do that. I was just so unhappy. So I chose the unknown over what I knew was unhealthy. And here's what's interesting. Looking back, I don't know that I'd even call the actual divorce the hardest part of that chapter. Because the hard part was everything that came before it. By the time my marriage ended, I had already spent years grieving the relationship while I was still in it. So when it finally ended, I didn't feel like my world was falling apart. It felt like life had changed directions. I was actually relieved. I was hopeful. And I knew I still had a lot of healing to do, but for the first time in a long time, I believed I could move forward. Leaving wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about choosing respect for myself. Before I move on, I want to say something, okay? I don't tell the story because I'm stuck in it. I tell it because it's part of my story. It's part of how I became the woman I am today. I never became bitter towards my first husband, and it may sound surprising, but I didn't walk away from that marriage filled with revenge or resentment. Now, that doesn't mean he's exactly a favorite topic of conversation, okay? And if you know me, you know I don't spend my days talking about my ex. In fact, I spend most of the time pretending that that chapter of my life is safely sitting at the top of a bookshelf somewhere, never to be bothered. I hated what I experienced. I hated the betrayal, the confusion, and the hurt it caused. But I refused to let those experiences become my identity. God gave me peace. A peace that allowed me to move forward without dragging yesterday into tomorrow, and that's exactly what I did. Bitterness would have kept me looking backward, but peace allowed me to keep looking ahead. And the only reason I revisit this chapter now is because it helps explain why I see life differently. I don't stay there, but I simply honor what it taught me. And when I look back, it was God's grace carrying me into that next chapter. I was more guarded. I questioned people's intentions. I wasn't looking for someone to rescue me. I was learning how to trust again, not just other people, but myself. And then healing wasn't instant, it happened little by little. As I healed, I found myself dreaming again, not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because I finally had the space to imagine a future that wasn't limited by fear. And that's really the point of this story. My life didn't go according to plan, but that unexpected turn didn't ruin my life. It redirected it. And maybe that's true for some of you too. As you go through this week, I want to leave you with something to reflect on. I want to ask you a question. When life didn't go according to your plan, what did it truly reveal about who you are? Perhaps you're standing in the middle of a chapter you never would have chosen. And maybe your unexpected turn wasn't a divorce. Perhaps it was a diagnosis, a layoff, or the loss of someone you love, a friendship that ended, or a dream that never came to be. But whatever it was not the end of your story. It was simply life asking you to take a different road. However your story looks today, I hope you'll remember this. Sometimes the life we planned is not the life we live. But that doesn't mean it's any less beautiful. Now, I thought the end of that marriage meant the end of the life I had planned. But that chapter became my first lesson in how life can rewrite our plan. I didn't lose my future. I was introduced to a new version of it with new characters and new settings. The dream of love and family I had, it never disappeared. Looking back now, I don't just see the end of a marriage. I see the beginning of a woman who discovered she was stronger than she realized. A woman who found the courage to let go of the life she thought she wanted so that she can embrace the life that was waiting for her. I didn't become bitter, I became wiser. And I've learned that protecting your peace doesn't mean closing your heart. It means trusting that God can write beautiful chapters, even after you've had to close one that you didn't want to end. And on that note, I'll stop talking and I'll let you get back to your own beautiful story now. But thank you for spending a little part of your day with me here on My Happiness Defined. And until next time, be kind to yourself. Embrace your journey and remember your story is still being written, and your happiness is yours to define.